Durdle Magic. Thank you for tuning in to Durdle Magic. Please subscribe and hit that notification bell if you like the content you see here today, and leave a like and share the video with someone you might think is interested. Leaving those likes really helps us out, but another way to help us out is by using our TCGPLAYER affiliate link below. If you're looking for singles, sealed product, or gaming accessories, please consider using our link to support the channel. We also have some playmats at inkgaming.com. Go ahead and hit the link in the description to check those out. Alright, let's grab some spells and Durdle with some magic. Hello and welcome back to Durdle Magic. I've had a lot of people approach me for a deck list for this, so I thought I'd do a deck tech on Bell Borca Spectral Sergeant. So let's get into it. Okay, so if we take a look at Bell Borca itself, it says, note the converted mana cost of each card as it's put into exile. This card's power is equal to the greatest number for this turn, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So what we have here is possible commander damage through exiling effects, plus it provides its own with red's Impulsive draw. So we really want to focus on exiling cards, but what do we do with that in red and white? So if we look at red first, what it brings to the table, of course, is Impulsive draw, where you get to exile the top card or cards of your library from your hand, your graveyard, what have you, and then are able to cast them. What else it also brings is a lot of the exiling your opponent's stuff and being able to then cast it or seal it. That is part of red's color pie in the more recent times. There's also abilities like Flashback, Unearth, Jumpstart, etc. that also exile stuff. I just don't feel like they're generally as good for this particular deck, although Flashback does have some potential if you're already playing some big things. Unearth creatures, the better ones either tend to be multicolored or not have a high CMC, and they're very temporary, and Jumpstart again has also temporary effects that aren't terribly good, although there are some better ones. And if you don't have anything else, they're perfectly serviceable. But for this deck in particular, we're going to go with exiling our own spells and our opponent's spells, and then casting those spells if able. What white brings to the deck is, especially for white, exile as removal, and there's an absolute ton of that, and you can have your choice. Everything from Angel of Sanctions to O-Ring to Winds of Abandon to, white has answers to everything, and a lot of it is exile. It also brings blink effects into the deck if you want to do something like that to reset some ETBs, or get some more value out of a creature, or even protect a creature from targeted removal. It can also do exiling as recursion for permanents, not so much spells. That's more of red's wheelhouse, and we'll get to that later on in the video. It also does graveyard control, which is very good against certain decks. In the deck I used in the videos, it didn't have too much of that, but if you have a meta where that is a concern, white can certainly answer that problem for you. Alright, with that summarized, let's get into some of the cards in the deck, or some of the cards I recommend for Bell Borca anyway, with red's Impulsive draw. Now, red has gotten a lot of this in recent time and recent history in the color pie, and I think it's a great fit for the color. You must use it now, give me options now. Very red, feels very red, and it's very effective. So cards I would consider for the deck, and some of which I did use in the deck, are Outpost Siege, specifically the Cons version where you exile the top card and you may cast it on the turn. Dragons can come into effect depending on how you build the deck, so it's a flexible card. A more flexible but also more vulnerable card would be Chandra Torch of Defiance. She does the exile thing, and then if you can't cast it, you do get a little bit of that payoff where she does 2 damage to each of your opponents. Plus she gives you, on her other positive ability, red back to your mana pool as an investment, and then it'll help you cast other stuff you may be able to exile rather. Also, she has some removal stapled onto her, and if you can get to the ultimate, it's just gravy. Then we have things like Velvet Exploration. Now this does have landfall, and it's Boros, so you're not exactly a landfall deck, as we all know. But it does give you that free Impulsive draw per land drop, and I did have some success with it in Bell Borca, at least in digital. Go ahead and try it in paper, because I think there's a difference between real-world application and the algorithm. But besides that, it is a pretty good card, plus it puts it into exile, so you can cast it, and it counts for Bell Borca, but then if it's still there, it puts it back into the graveyard to be recurred, which is very important, and that's what really made me jump on this card for this deck, because it's not going to stay in exile, it's not a waste. So unless they destroy the enchantment, you're usually getting your cards back, and that's a very good effect, especially when we have Recursion in red and white. which again, we'll get to later in the video. Now we get to some of the juicier bits, stealing our opponent's stuff through Exile. Now this isn't as good as, say, maybe Gaunty or some other blue spells, but I do like the kind of semi-randomness of red as a player. I don't know if you like that or not, but let's go over some of that in either case. Stolen Strategy pulled out a lot of work, and I think it was game 2. Stolen Strategy is a really good card. You do have to wait around the table, so it is a big investment at 5, so do be careful when you play it. But at the beginning of the upkeep, your upkeep, exile the top card of each opponent's library, so you get to pick and choose. So the odds of you hitting something good are better than if you just exile one card. So I like it in the deck. I recommend it for Bell Borca. Breaches was a last video addition to the deck. It has whenever a pirate you control deals damage to your opponents, exile top card of each opponent hit, and you may cast those and spend any mana. So not for free, but still pretty good. You still get that exiling effect for your commander. It is after the fact, so this is more for getting spells away from your opponents, because if you put them in exile, it does deny them some resources. It itself has menace, and we don't use any other pirates in the deck, but at 4, it has some evasion, it has some exiling stuff. So it's more of a control thing. Plus, if you have mana, if you save it towards the second main phase, you get to cast whatever they have if you want to. And you can cast it, use mana as though it had any color. So there's some value there. Another, of course, really good card is Atali. It also exiles things. Again, this will affect Bell Borca less than Stolen Strategy because it happens later. But this one will still possibly give Bell Borca a bonus because it's on the attack. So you can respond with whatever they have if you have mana up before they do blocks, before maybe they launch spells, unless they respond to the trigger itself. And of course, Atali also being a 6/6 doesn't hurt either. However, you don't want to leave out the little guys. So if you really want something done soon, Grenzo and Robber of the Rich are really good for that. Grenzo, if you can get in there early, if you can keep putting pressure on your opponents, you can go and exile their stuff. Goad helps protect you. Robber of the Rich is a little bit more iffy. They do have to have more cards in hand than you. This is Boros, but I was doing fairly well on the card draw. Again, not the most powerful deck ever, so this may still be very relevant to you and your meta. So I'd recommend trying Robber of the Rich and seeing if you can get some mileage out of that. But again, exiling, you get to cast something. Grenzo, exiling, you get to cast something. Use your opponent's weapons against them, and it increases your options and flexibility in the deck, especially when it comes to Boros. Okay, and now on to white. What does white bring to the deck? Well, first and most obvious is removal. White is really good at removal, especially with exiling effects, and white generally has an answer to just about anything. I don't think there's a permanent that it can't affect. It doesn't have as many good defenses against spells, but that's not what we're going for in this deck. So, Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Journey to Nowhere if you're into that, just all of that stuff. Winds of Abandon can be a board wipe in your favor. Yes, it does give your opponents a lot more lands, but it's really something you want to use as a panic button kind of removal almost, or if you think you're going to be able to close out a game. Also, at times, it only gets basic lands, so if you have a meta where a lot of people play a lot of non-basics, they're not getting much out of it. Winds of Abandon can also, of course, be cast on one target at sorcery speed, so it's not as good as Swords or Path, but it's still there. It still does the exiling thing. 1 in white's not a bad cost, necessarily. Have been instant, it would have been, almost as broken as Cycrypt, but I digress. Then we get to a card called Dust to Dust, which I found while I was searching and doing research to build this deck. It says exile 2 artifacts from the game, 2 target artifacts, and it's sorcery. Into the Core is instant, and it's 2 red, so you can do that if you don't have Dust to Dust, which is fine. I just wanted something that cost a little bit less because it's Boros. I wanted to be a little bit tighter on that mana. And then we have a card I really like, Angel of Sanctions. It's a flyer 3/4, comes into play for 5, but when it comes into play, you get to exile something till it leaves the battlefield. So very much a Fiend Hunter effect. And you can add Fiend Hunter and Banisher Priest to the deck too. The problem with the creatures is they tend to be fragile. This one in particular I like because as Embalm, you can exile the card from the graveyard, hence another exiling effect, get a token of it into play, exile something else, so you definitely get at least 5 power in Bell Borca, or at least, an extra shot at control. So I really like this card in the deck. It can be flexible, it can come out of nowhere, people can forget about it, exile something, and exile is a non-land permanent, so it does answer just about everything, even Planeswalkers. Now, if you're going to use an angel that has an ETB, an enter the battlefield ability or triggered ability, you're going to want stuff that might blink it, and white is fantastic at blinking things. Between white and blue, I think white has some of the more flexible ones, although not the more powerful ones necessarily. But let's take a look at what we can do in this deck. Felidar Guardian, of course, is a combo piece. I did include a combo with it in the deck. It never came up, and I don't have tutors for it. You can build Bell Borca around that, though. Have him be the front man for a combo deck. Red deals damage, white does the flickering and the blinking. There you go. Livio's a new one. He's more about saving our stuff and bringing it back. He is a bit more expensive, but he helps protect us from board wipes, especially if we can't cast any of that stuff from Exile. And we need a board presence because we are Boros. This deck anyway relies on creatures, so we need that. Charming Prince, on the other hand, does blink something until end of turn, so it can dodge a wipe. It can also just reset a creature, get a blocker up, stuff like that. It also gains you a little bit of life and can scry 2, and that scry 2 can help a lot sometimes, especially in Boros. Then we have Eldrazi Displacer, another combo piece, especially if you have a way to reset your lands or get colorless mana. Dockside Extortionist would probably come up with that, so that's a good thing. Then we have the instant blink effects, something like Cloud Shift, something like Long Road Home, Otherworldly Journey, Eerie Interlude, and that way you can exile your stuff and protect it, and it doesn't have to be everything. Eerie Interlude says pick and choose basically how many targets, so it's good. You don't have to blink Bell Borca, especially if you can get through for damage. So there's that. Also, if you do the targeted ones, Feather the Redeemed might be an include you consider. I do have it in the deck. It didn't come up very often, but a 3/4 flyer for 3 is nothing to sneeze at. And if you can blink your stuff and just get the blink spell back, you can get extra value out of your ETBs. Now, here's an area where red and white kind of overlap, and that's in the recursion department through Exile. So let's look at some stuff. Red does it via spells, instants, and sorceries, and white does it via permanents. So you kind of get both your bases covered here, and I kind of like that out of red and white in this deck. So we have things like Past in Flames and Backdraft Hellkite, where they get back instants and sorceries. Flashback, you have to exile something, so it again feeds Bell Borca's power. But then, of course, you're also exiling stuff out of your graveyard to get another reuse out of it, so it's more of that impulsive red side. Then we have stuff like Promise of Tomorrow from Commander Legends and Angel of Serenity, where if your creatures die, exile it for Promise of Tomorrow, and then when Promise of Tomorrow dies, because if you have no creatures, they all come back to the battlefield, again, triggering all your enter the battlefield effects. And then we have something like Angel of Serenity, which doubles as both removal for creatures and recursion for creatures. And if you have a blink effect again, you just blink her, get all that stuff back like you drew the cards from your graveyard, or you can give your stuff back to your opponents, depending if you can make a deal. Angel Serenity is a card I really like. I would definitely recommend Angel Serenity at the top end if you can manage that. I think it's a really good card. Backdraft Hellkite has some drawbacks because it does because it has to attack. So there is that risk in there. Promise from Tomorrow, I did manage in a few games in testing. It's a hit and miss kind of card, so you might want to consider something else depending on your meta and how aggressive it is with the board wipes and something like that. For Past in Flames, if you are doing more of a blink and having Feather as a backup kind of build, I'd recommend Past in Flames just to get some of those blinks back. Remember though, with Feather, the spells, once they resolve, they have to hit the graveyard for her ability to trigger, so if they get exiled because of flashback, that's not going to work. Okay, so in summary for Bell Borca, I basically just split it down the middle, red side, white side, decide what the colors did for the deck. So let's go over that. Red, remember, Impulsive Draw, our commander does it. Chandra Torch with the Fire does it. There's also a few other Chandras that also do that. Outpost Siege also works. There are other effects that also do it. If you also want to exile your opponent's spells, I do recommend that just to give the deck a little bit of flexibility. So Stolen Strategy, Atali, Grenzo, if you can manage it for yourself anyway. Sunbird's Invocation could also be good to get a little bit of advantage if you have that effect. For white, of course, we have Exiling Removal, which is always good, and then we have the blink effects, and those can be really good with ETBs, especially if you want to combo off with maybe Dockside Extortionist, or you want to do a Felidar Guardian, Restoration Angel, Impact Tremors, or Pulveros God of the Forge kind of combo if you want to burn out your opponents. Something we didn't cover too much in here is the Graveyard Hate, because I only had 2 cards in the deck that do it. But again, white is very good at the Graveyard Hate. It is usually symmetrical, so be careful if you're going to do more of a spell slinger kind of thing with the blink spells. But I did have Apostle of Purifying Light in the deck, and it exiles targeted things, so if you want to put something in like that, that's perfectly good. And that's basically the tenets of the deck, the tenets of the construction of the deck for Bell Borca. In the comments, let me know how you might be building Bell Borca, and let me know if this deck tech was helpful to you, if you liked it, if there's things I should have expanded on, covered more in depth, and maybe I can do that for the next one. In your case, this is my first deck tech on the channel, so I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you for the next series for Commander Legends.